Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem.
Unlike the D.C. media, I'm sure that you all at least know that there are two Dakotas. Almost overnight, we went from a roaring economy to a tragic nationwide shutdown. By the beginning of 2020, President Trump had created 7 million new American jobs. We had the lowest unemployment rate in over half a century, and unemployment rates for Black, Hispanic, and Asian Americans reached the lowest levels in history. More than 10 million people had been lifted out of poverty and out of welfare.
I'm concerned that if we don't impeach this president, he will get reelected.
And all of that changed in March. Now, most governors shut down their states.
We can't just say stop everything.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
What followed was record unemployment, businesses closed, most schools were shuttered, and communities suffered. And the U.S. economy came to an immediate halt. Now, let me be clear. COVID didn't crush the economy. Government crushed the economy. Just as quickly, government turned around and held itself out as the savior. And frankly, the Treasury Department can't print money fast enough to keep up with Congress's wish list. South Dakota is the only state that never ordered a single business or church to close. We never instituted a shelter-in-place order. We never mandated that people wear masks. We never even defined what an essential business is, because I don't believe that governors have the authority to tell you that your business isn't essential. South Dakota schools are no different than schools everywhere else in America, but we approach the pandemic differently.
The YMCA also has put forward statistics. 40,000 kids at 1,100 sites. There were no reports of coronavirus outbreaks or clusters.
From the earliest days of the pandemic, our priority was the students, their well-being, and their education. When it was time to go back to school in the fall, we put our kids in the classroom. Teachers, administrators, parents, and the students themselves were of one mind to make things work for our children. And the best way to do that was in the classroom. Now, in South Dakota, I provided all of the information that we had to our people, and then I trusted them to make the best decisions for themselves, for their families, and in turn, their communities.
Dumb people are outbreeding smart people at a staggering pace.
We never focused on the case numbers. Instead, we kept our eye on hospital capacity. Now, Dr. Fauci, he told me that on my worst day, I'd have 10,000 patients in the hospital. On our worst day, we had a little over 600. Dr. Fauci is wrong a lot. Even in a pandemic, public health policy needs to take into account people's economic and social well-being. Daily needs still need to be met. People need to keep a roof over their heads. They need to feed their families, and they still need purpose. They need their dignity. Now, my administration resisted the call for virus control at the expense of everything else. We looked at the science, the data, and the facts, and then we took a balanced approach. Truthfully, I never thought that the decisions that I was making were going to be unique. I thought that there would be more who would follow basic conservative principles, but I guess I was wrong.
That is the dumbing down of America by our news media.
We have to show people how arbitrary these restrictions are, and the coercion, force, and the anti-liberty steps that governments take to enforce them. Often, the enforcement isn't based on facts. Justifying these mitigation efforts has been anything but scientific. Now, many in the media labeled me as ill-informed, that I was reckless, and even a denier. Some even claimed that South Dakota was as bad as it gets anywhere in the world. That is a lie. The media did all of this while simultaneously praising governors who issued lockdowns, who mandated masks and shut down businesses, applauding them as having taken the right steps to mitigate the spread of the virus. At one point, I appeared on George Stephanopoulos' Sunday show. He had just wrapped up a segment with New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, where he asked Cuomo to give me some advice on how to deal with COVID. Now seems like a really good time to remind everyone of what Governor Cuomo was doing in New York. On March 25th, Cuomo ordered COVID patients into nursing homes, and he prohibited the staff from testing people before admitting them. 9 days later, he pushed legislation prohibiting nursing home lawsuits over COVID deaths. 6 days after that, he prohibited nursing homes from sending COVID patients to the nearby Naval Hospital ship or the field hospital, both of which were essentially empty. 8 days after that, the first deaths started to show up. And on January 28th of this year, the New York Attorney General announced that Cuomo and his administration significantly undercounted the number of COVID-related deaths in nursing homes by as much as 50%. To make matters worse, they tried to cover it up. That is the media's COVID hero.
That is the dumbing down of America by our news media.
He also earned an Emmy, and he wrote a book on his COVID response. We did things differently. We applied common sense and conservative governing principles.
We don't necessarily use a lot of common sense.
We never exceeded our hospital capacity, and our economy is booming. We have the lowest unemployment rate in the nation. We are number one in the nation for keeping jobs, keeping businesses open, and our schools are open. Our founding fathers established our national constitution, and the people of individual states crafted their own constitutions that place specific limits on the role of government. Those limits are essential to preventing government officials from trampling on people's rights. The people themselves are primarily responsible for their own health and their well-being. No governor should ever dictate to their people which activities are officially approved or not approved. No governor should ever arrest, ticket, or fine people for exercising their freedoms. Governors and members of Congress and the President have a duty to respect the rights of the people who elected them. But it seems these days that conservatives are the only ones who know what that means. Personal responsibility is considered a God-given gift in South Dakota. There was a worse movement that was happening in 2020. We watched an organized, coordinated campaign to remove and eliminate all references to our nation's founding and many other parts of our history. By discrediting the individuals who formed America's founding principles, they create doubt, and then they can remake America into a very different political image.
The House Democrats chose to wander into various areas of policy that are barely related, if at all, to the issue before us.
They see this as a moment to do a lot of things they've been wanting to do for years that has nothing to do with COVID.
The signers of the Declaration of Independence put their lives and their sacred honor on the line, and they affirmed people's God-given freedoms. These ideals cannot be dismissed as the opinions of flawed men. Our founders had their flaws, certainly. But to use those flaws to condemn their ideals and the greatest constitution that the world has ever seen is both unjust and it's self-defeating. To attempt to cancel the founding generation is an attempt to cancel our own freedoms. Let's always remember, America is good. Freedom is better than tyranny. We are unique. We are exceptional. And no American should ever apologize for that. We should illustrate to the world that people thrive when government is limited, and people's ingenuity and their creativity is unleashed. We should also remind the world what happens when tyranny and oppression are allowed to thrive. These days, too many are embracing China, a nation that crushes freedom of speech and religion. China literally places religious minorities in internment camps. China responded to the COVID virus by trying to cover it up. And one of their mitigation strategies was to weld doors shut to lock families in their homes. Friends of China are not friends of freedom.
A joint communique on the establishment of diplomatic relations between the United States of America and the People's Republic of China, our rapidly expanding relationship, requires a kind of structure that only full diplomatic relations will make possible.
Joe Biden has been in politics for 50 years. At that time, our national debt was roughly $450 billion. Today, that's pretty close to what we pay in interest. Everyone is to blame. We are not here to tell you how to live your life, how to treat you like a child or a criminal because you go to church or you defend yourself. Conservatives respect people as individuals. We don't divide people based on their religion, their culture, or the color of their skin.
Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
Whether you're for me or Trump and you ain't black.
We don't shun people who think for themselves, and we understand that every single person is different. Each person deserves the opportunity to build his or her life without some self-important government bureaucrat telling them what they can or what they can't do. We don't have the media on our side.
Yahoo News, left wing. Google News, left wing. HuffPost, left wing. CNN, left wing.
All these moves are moves towards impeachment.
New York Times, left wing.
The New York Times released an op-ed describing a resistance. The article was written by an anonymous author.
NBC, left wing. Washington Post, left wing.
And have now settled with the prestigious Washington Post.
The Guardian, left wing. The Wall Street Journal, left wing. ABC News, left wing. BBC News, left wing. USA Today, left wing. LA Times, left wing.
This pandemic illustrated that many politicians have a totally different vision for government than what the founders laid out. I believe South Dakota has been an example to the nation this past year. People used personal responsibility to protect their family's health and their way of life, while the government respected their rights and their freedom. We took the American path. We must go into this fight for freedom educated to the tactics the liberals will use.
And you want to talk politics, you smear somebody with falsehoods and all the rest.
I think there's plenty of evidence of collusion or conspiracy.
Very real possibility that President Putin holds damaging information over President Trump.
Trump's eagerness to sell out America proves the Russians must have something.
Where he basically spouts Putin's lies.
And then You write it.
The president's tweet trying to make the case that he's not a Russian asset really just undercuts his own defense.
Trump has been a pawn of the Russians.
Unless they see it's reported in the press that this, and this.
The tactics the liberals will use.
Why don't you come dressed up as Ku Klux Klansmen yourselves? You go, war with Bush, KKK supports Bush. When it's seen in the media, this will do far more damage.
So they have that validation that the press reported the smear.
The tactics the liberals will use.
You take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you.
They wipe their phones. They had this accident on 30 phones.
The tactics the liberals will use.
Hidden camera video that catches Democratic staffers talking about organizing disruptions and violence at Trump campaign rallies.
The tactics the liberals will use.
For sure, conservatives are being discriminated against by social media platforms.
The tactics the liberals will use.
We learned today that the Clinton campaign did rig the presidential nominating process.
The tactics the liberals will use.
Anywhere where the left gets control, you start to see political correctness run amok. They use projection. Right before they do so, they start attacking the people that they're about to go after of being guilty of the very things that they do.
A number of Democratic leaders caught not following their own coronavirus guidelines.
The tactics the liberals will use.
The 100th night of protests, they face charges including riot.
Show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
Well, this is just a warning to you Trumpers. Be careful, walk lightly. And for those of you who are soldiers, make them pay.
You know, there needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
They're not going to stop before Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after election. They're not going to let up, and they should not.
The tactics the liberals will use.
The House managers manipulated evidence and selectively edited footage, created false representations of tweets, but they selectively edited the president's words over and over again.
The tactics the liberals will use.
The conservatives that I know in Hollywood, and there are a lot, cannot give money because their names will come up as Republicans. Many people will not hire them.
The tactics the liberals will use.
You're appropriating $1.9 trillion, most of it not related to COVID. We haven't spent the money that we've allocated in the past.
That is the dumbing down of America by our news media.
Our species has been getting dumber.
Is there any wonder why Ronald Reagan often said, "I didn't leave the Democratic Party, it left me. It left me."